Greetings, digital world. Welcome back once again to another episode of Spliced In Later, that obscure YouTube channel that talks about movies every now and then. I had a few questions recently. Someone actually asked me, why do you call it Spliced In Later? And that's fair. I've been doing this for 4 years now, just over 4 years. And I haven't really addressed it. And I've picked up a few listeners since then, or watchers, or however you're doing this. It's just a joke. It's not a very funny joke. You had to be there to hear the joke. You had to appreciate that the joke wasn't very funny. And unless you know the circumstances, it's just nonsense. But Spliced In Later, we call it Spliced In Later because way back in the day, I wanted to start this podcast as a group podcast with a few of my friends. And we got as far as setting up a record date to go and talk about, what did we see? I think we saw Independence Day Resurgence. And we set that up to talk about that movie in my friend's living room. It was absolutely awful. It exists somewhere on someone's hard drive. It will never see the light of day. But it was just these guys sitting very far away from each other with no showmanship of any kind, filming themselves talking about a movie that they really didn't have that much to say about. And it was... I even showed up to this thing wearing a stupid hat on my head and glasses, trying to give myself an image. Because, YouTubers, they all have their images. It's just terrible. But when it came to what we call ourselves, no one had actually come up with anything. So one of my friends, when it got to that point where it's like, he made the joke that we could just spliced in later. And then we laughed at that and was like, that could be the funny joke. Every time we go back to this podcast, we say we still don't know what we are, or well, we'll splice it in later. And then that's the name. The podcast never went anywhere, but then when I picked it up on my own, I was like, that's a funny name because I was there at the time to appreciate the stupid humor of that. I'm just going to call it that. And I've never explained it. My YouTube description does not explain why I'm called that. I just sort of talk like everyone knows what's going on. So if you've ever wondered, if you've been listening to me for 4 years, or if you listened for a couple of bits here or there, and you're like, why the fuck is it called Spliced In Later? There's your answer for you. So there that is. For this week, it's just a normal episode this week. It will, in fact, though, probably be our last normal episode of the year. And when I say normal episode, what I mean is that an episode that is not talking about a new movie to review or a new TV show that's finished or rankings or anything like that. And the only reason that's a normal episode is because I kicked this off during the pandemic when no movies were coming out. So my regular content was just whatever I could come up with that week. But after this episode, I think I've got movie reviews pretty much back to back. There's at least 3 that I can think of that I want to review. No, 4. There's 4 I want to review before the end of the year to put in the potential running for top 10 movies of 2023. And that's not to discount if I hear about another movie. We did Saltburn recently. That was not on my radar. I may or may not go see this Godzilla -1 movie. I don't know. So it's all up in the air at the moment. But there is only, that's more like it, a few weeks left of the year. Christmas is fast approaching. So the real estate's going to be very small. It's going to be a lot of that. A lot of reviews, a lot of the other content, not so much looking back or whatever we call this particular episode, I should say. But it is a spare week, and I thought, why not? And why we're talking about this particular movie today as well is kind of, it's sort of a celebration, but also a remembrance, cautionary tale, however you want to look at this. So obviously this year is Disney's 100th celebration. I believe they kicked off the celebrations with Strange World when that was released last year. That's when we got the first 100 logo for Disney. But this year has been officially the 100 years of Disney. Lots of celebrations, lots of pomp and circumstance, blah, blah, blah. They released that Once Upon a Studio thing on Disney+, which I have to admit was very sweet and nice, and I did like that. But a lot of that has been building up to a Disney animated movie that's coming out this year as part of the Disney animated classics called Wish, which is supposed to be... Now, as I record this, I have not seen the movie, so I don't know what it's about. From what I hear in context, it's got something to do with the origin of a wishing star or wishing on a star. I don't really know, but it's supposed to be like a combination of 2D and 3D animation a celebration of all that has made Disney what it is, blah, yada, yada, yada. I don't really know. Until I see it, I can't say. But lovely Australia here, we don't get it for some time. It came out in America 2 weeks ago, I think. Probably worldwide 2 weeks ago. Australia doesn't get it till Boxing Day. I luckily am going to be able to see it this weekend at a advanced screening. It is in fact a family fun day. I didn't really have a family to bring to it, but I'll try and have a fun day there and not be creepy, I guess. But I have to see it then because otherwise it'll get lumped in. I have to wait a few more weeks and then all the other blockbusters come out, and Boxing Day time's not a great time to go to the movie theaters. I don't particularly like it. So where I can, I'm going to sneak in and see it. But I'm hearing very mixed reviews about it. Anywhere from it's so average, it's disappointing for a 100-year movie, to it's terrible, it's trashy, it's all no substance, all member berries and nostalgia bait and all of that stuff. I'm kinder on movies than a lot of people, so I don't expect that I will hate it when I see it, but I honestly don't know what to expect when I go see it. It's disappointing if it does end up being bleh, because for 100 years, it'd be nice if the movie that came out knocked it out of the park. But also, you put that as well with whiny people on the internet who, it's a fine line between actually genuinely critiquing something for being not particularly good or bad or whatever, and just being entitled, privileged. I went this, I went that. You know, who knows? Having not seen the final product, I can't say for myself. But I had planned for Wish to be like, oh, it's my big 100-year celebration for Disney. And it turns out that might not be the case. And because it's late, and by the time I get to Wish, that's already passed, I thought instead, why don't we celebrate 100 years of Disney in the most wholesome way possible by talking about what probably arguably is the greatest Disney animated classic to come out of their line. And that is The Lion King. Came out in 1994. Starring Matthew Broderick, Jeremy Irons, James Earl Jones, music by Elton John and Hans Zimmer. The peak of Disney Renaissance. A truly fantastic film. Now, we've ranked Disney on here before. Lion King is not my favorite Disney film. That prize goes to Mulan. Obviously, though, we all have different tastes. What a particular Disney film is about, in substance as well as storytelling and characters, will determine whether that is your favorite movie or not. But as Mulan is my favorite Disney film, I can step back and go, but the most well-made film, the best film, is probably The Lion King. Not just in terms of success for box office and critical acclaim, but in terms of the animation style, the story substance, the writing, all of that stuff. Its larger impact on pop culture as a whole and the way stories are told in animation. It's a larger world, it's direct-to-DVD sequels, it's TV shows. It's a pretty big thing, it's a big deal, and it's solid stuff. And I think you'd be hard-pressed to find somebody who watches The Lion King and goes, whatever, it's mid, I don't care. Now, Chicken Little, that's some good Disney stuff. No, you're not going to find it. So there's not going to be a lot of substance to this episode. It's not going to be particularly long. We're just going to remember how cool The Lion King was and how it really solidified at that time in that Disney Renaissance period. At that point, Disney was top of the game in animation. No one could compete against them. Not so much now, but really when you think of Disney and the Disney brand for animation, I think Lion King springs to mind pretty well. Ignoring whatever that may be, that they may have ripped off Kimber the White Lion, which is entirely possible. I've seen Kimber the White Lion as a kid. I don't know. The bits that are similar are very similar, but then Kimber's stuff is a lot more violent and dark and more adult, I would think. If you don't know what Kimber the White Lion is, it's a Japanese animated show, but it's the same sort of thing where Kimber's a white lion who eventually becomes the leader of a group of animals and has to fight evil lions and all of that stuff. The story is less The Lion King, because The Lion King in itself is just Hamlet retold through lions. But there's a lot of imagery which is very suspicious. That iconic shot of Simba on Pride Rock, there's just as equal a shot of Kimba, the white lion, on a big rock being heroic. So we're not going to talk about that. But for everything that Disney has that's perfect, there's always something there that can be a little bit off or poked at or whatever. So it's not like Disney has always been really good and then suddenly they're bad. If you want a proper analysis of Disney's legacy, there's this guy on YouTube called Animat, I think. If you Google that, you don't Google on YouTube. If you look for it on YouTube, if you find a guy wearing an orange hat, you found him. He did an extensive YouTube run where he talked about all the classic Disneys in origin chronologically from Snow White all the way, I think, till Frozen 2, maybe. Except for the wartime package stuff, which is fine. There's not much there to talk about. You can either watch all the videos separately, or if you've got a spare 12 and a half hours, you can watch one long video. But he analyzes the production for every movie, how it led to be, who was involved, the ups, the downs. But when I watched that, what I was surprised to learn was just how insignificant a lot of these Disney films have been critically and box office wise. A lot of the time, critic reviews were, it's fine. And a lot of the time, the box office was okay. It's really only recently that box office has been staggeringly for Disney. And that's because that's just the world we live in terms of pop culture, accessibility, yada, 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 all of that stuff as well. So Disney has never been just always good and then suddenly bad. I think for the most part, Disney has just been okay and then had a really good period and then went back to being okay. And even then, you go back and look at some of the stuff in the really good period, like Pocahontas or The Rescuers Down Under. There's some controversy and some not so great stuff there as well. So what's the point of all that? I guess the idea that Disney has fumbled its 100th year celebration, those 100 years have been a fumble, really. So it's not a big deal. It's not enough really to get too upset about. I say that having not seen the film. The Lion King is Hamlet. If you haven't seen it, why haven't you seen it? You should go watch it. It's very readily available for you. But it tells the story of Simba, a young lion who's born to the greatest king of all time, Mufasa, king of the lions of Pride Rock. One day he'll be king of everything the light touches. Classic origin story for a prince. But oh no, evil Uncle Scar, voiced wonderfully by Jeremy Irons, who wanted to be king until Simba came along. For his machinations, Mufasa straight up dies in a horrific way where he's trampled to death by wildebeests. Simba runs away, he's exiled, Scar takes over, pretty much destroys the Pride Lands. Simba grows up outcast with the wonderful Timon and Pumbaa until eventually he's pulled back in to accept his destiny as king. It's a very basic storyline that has a lot going for it in terms of the substance of the characters and the performance by the voice actors. James Earl Jones, he's so good as Mufasa. Jeremy Irons is Scar. Scar's one of those villains where he's so evil, but he's so delightful to watch. He's so wonderful that you're just like, you should die, but until you do, I'm glad you're around. I enjoy this performance. There's not a single character in The Lion King that is wasted or doesn't really have anything to do. The closest, by just a smidge, is Sarabi, Simba's mother. She doesn't really get much to do in terms of just, I am Mufasa's wife, now I am his widow. But someone has to get the short straw, and even then she gets a great scene where she tells Scar to basically go piss off. So there you have that. But aside from that, you've also got Nathan Lane and Ernie Sabella as Timon and Pumbaa, the wonderful meerkat and warthog who birthed the whole Hakuna Matata, no worries, the life mantra that a lot of people try desperately to hold to just to get them through the madness that is life. Don't worry about it. Who gives a shit? Move on. Great characters. You got Nala, the betrothed to Simba, who's a very independent love interest for him. Simba himself, voiced as a kid by Jonathan Taylor Thomas, and he grows up to Matthew Broderick. Very much a good coming-of-age origin story for the character, for a kid who's like, yeah, I get to be king and I get to boss everybody around. I don't give two shits. Oh shit, did I just cause my father to die? Oh my god. Now I'm going to grow up crushed and broken, and now I have to accept the responsibility of whether I did cause the death of my father or not. I got to go back and fix it. A great hero's journey tale that a lot of movies have tried to mimic since then. Even smaller characters, you got Rowan Atkinson as Zazu, we got befuddled Mr. Bean as a bird, great. Rafiki, the insane lion. No, he's not a lion, he's a monkey, or he's a baboon. I'm the insane one. Smacking Simba in the head and singing a song about squash bananas. The hyenas, Whoopi Goldberg and friends. Terrifyingly stupid until they start eating people, and then you're like, holy shit. The end of Scar in this movie is one of the darkest endings for a Disney villain. I really wish we would go back to that time where Disney villains were just evil for the sake of evil. There was no trauma. There was no, maybe if we understand them, we can learn to help them be better people or sway them to our side. No, back when Scar was around and Ursula and Gaston and Jafar, Clayton, Hades, they were just Judge Frollo. They were just evil. They were bad. And you just wanted them to die, and often they would die in horrific, terrible ways. Scar getting eaten by hyenas, that's up there for holy shit, that's a terrible way to die. Alongside the obviously great vocal performances and just a really good story, whether it's a rip-off of Hamlet or Kimber or whatever, it's one of the best Disney stories of all time, and the characters and the vocal performances are some of the best Disney's ever done. But aside from all that, the other two things that make this just the gold standard of Disney classics is the animation style and the animation used to tell stories through visualization, and the accompanying music, whether it's songs or soundtrack accompanying music of sorts. The animation is incredible. It looks great. You watch the way animation just sort of jumps during the Renaissance period. You start with The Little Mermaid, where it's there, but it's still rough around the edges. By the time you get to The Lion King, it's so crisp and natural. It just feels like you're just watching a movie. It's a lot easier as well with animals as well. You don't think too much about it being animated when it's just not humans, I suppose. But the animation used to visualize the storytelling with the light of the Pride Lands and then the darkness of the Shadowlands, and how the Pride Lands turn to ash and everything while Scar's in command, in contrast with the oasis that Timon and Pumbaa live in, the fog and despair and lighting of the wallowness of Mufasa being dead, and Scar telling Simba it was his fault. It's really taking hold of what obviously Walt Disney and co wanted to do way back when they did Snow White, was not just to tell a story with animation, but to use animation to enhance the storytelling. When he started off with Snow White, it was like, no one has ever made an animated story that's up to 90 minutes. I want to do that. But anyone can do, by that point, can just tell a story with animation. Everybody was doing it. There's so many bad animated movies from obscure production companies through the 70s and the 80s. People could just make whatever they wanted. The goal was to then use animation to enhance your storytelling. If you're going to tell a story through animation, take advantage of it. You can tell stories with animation in a way that you cannot do with live action storytelling. So, the changing of the seasons, the fact that the live action, and I use quotation marks which you can't see in real life, the live action Lion King pretty much took a lot of the scenes of Lion King, which is just the animation, and sort of did that with their photorealistic stuff of the changing of the seasons, the thing that floats, the feather, I would say, that floats from Rafiki's tree all the way to where Simba's living. It's truly incredible visual stuff. When Simba takes the Pride Land throne at the end as well, with the lightning and the mud and the way the Pride Lands slowly come back to life, it is really going, you want animation to tell this story? Here it is. And accompanying that as well, the music. Elton John's music, the songs that he wrote for this, fantastic. I believe he was supposed to sing the songs for the movie, and then eventually the characters in the movie actually did instead anyway, which I think is better because it enhances their characters. But obviously Elton John recorded all that music and released it alongside the movie. And, everyone knows now The Circle of Life and Can You Feel the Love Tonight? But it was one of those early moments where an artist really made their impact on a movie rather than just come write some songs for us, but just don't get involved because we need this to be Disney. This is very much Elton John's Disney, in the same way that Tarzan is 100% Phil Collins. If Elton John had been allowed to sing the songs in the way that they just let Phil Collins loose with Tarzan, insane. But you really feel his mark, his vibe, the way he approaches music and storytelling in his songs. It really enhances the Lion King feel. And alongside that, Hans Zimmer's just accompanying music. There are so many iconic music beats for when Simba's talking to dead Mufasa in the sky, or when Simba and Mufasa are lying in the grass and they're talking about how Mufasa will never die, but if he does, I'll be up in the stars. Or Rafiki realizing Simba's alive, Scar throwing Mufasa to his death. There's so many iconic music beats which I would love to play for you on this episode of the podcast, but I can't do that because I'm sure I would be copyright struck in an instant. But I mean, it won Academy Awards. It's music that makes you feel something when you listen to it. It enhances the storytelling that you're watching, and when you hear that piece of music outside of the movie, your brain is immediately taught back to that particular scene that piece of music is from. Truly iconic stuff, and it's all just like the perfect storm: the music, the animation, the voice acting, the storytelling, the peak Disney hit with the Renaissance time, once Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast and Little Mermaid had really gone, yeah, take note, Disney's doing some good shit at the moment, really pay attention. It's just truly great stuff. It's the gold standard, it's the highest high of Disney animation, and yeah, it really shows just how good they can do when they really focus on creativity, and not so much nostalgia and callbacks. But let's be fair, it's not just Disney, it's everything at the moment. It's Marvel, it's DC, it's Mission Impossible, it's the Karate Kid, it's Godzilla. It's all about remember this. It's substituting story for nostalgia. I'm a bit kinder on that stuff, but I totally get why people are over it, because that's all you really get at the moment. I hope we're getting to a point where, with the box office failures, the loss of money, the lack of interest in things, that in a way that the universe eventually will expand to a point where it snaps and then crumples in on itself. I think that's where we are with Hollywood, and I think that will result in much smaller products of movies where less money is spent, more original ideas are taken a risk on, and that's where you'll get your Taxi Drivers, your Dog Day Afternoons, your iconic movies from the 80s, which are just small independent stuff, which just really good movie telling. And I hope Disney does that as well with its animated classics. That said, as I said, 3 times, Disney has never been always good to a point and now suddenly bad. Their whole thing for their animated classics is a roller coaster. 1 minute they're up, the next they're down. For every Cinderella, there's a Black Cauldron. For every Beauty and the Beast, there's a Home on the Range. For every Frozen, there's a Strange World, sadly. And I'm not saying the dips are bad movies, it's just the ebb and flow of their run. So I'm less upset than other people are to be like, oh no, this is bad. But I will check in with you a week from now to confirm if I'm still thinking the same way once I've seen Wish. There you are. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. As I said, it wasn't a really substance analysis of The Lion King. It's just, that was a good movie. Remember this? That was good. Remember that? That was good. Boy, oh boy, Lion King's a good movie. Gold standard of Disney. It's a nice little celebration of the good that Disney has given us in its 100 years, rather than focusing on the negative or the disappointments or the letdowns or whatever that everybody on the internet would rather focus on. But I guess that sells. Negativity and complaining gets more hits on YouTube than positivity and excitement. That's just the world we live in, sadly. Here's hoping 2024 things might change for everyone. That would be nice. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. As I said, I'll be back next week to review Wish, and then that starts a roller coaster where we'll be talking about Wonka, Chicken Run, Dawn of the Nugget, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, all building towards the inevitable top 10 movies of 2023 from Spliced In Later, and I'm excited to hammer that list out because there has been some really good stuff this year. It's been a lot harder to do this. I think this has been the hardest year for me to make a top 10 list since the pandemic, since 2020 so it started. So I'm excited to bring that to you. I'm excited to review these movies for you, and I hope you are relatively interested to listen to what I have to say. Either way, I appreciate the click and the view. There we are. Until next week, I love and appreciate you as always. It does mean a lot to me, however long you listen, for however bit of time. It truly does. You've been spliced in later. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.